Race Remix. Welcome to Race Remix, conversations with artists, performers, educators, and thought leaders, curated to help you unlock the power of imagination and experience the impossible as possible. Many societies, including the United States, are experiencing a period of significant polarization and a loss of faith in its institutions. So it might be surprising to learn that the American public still places a lot of trust in museums, according to research. This is true across partisan lines. What is it that makes museums relevant? And why are people drawn to them? Co-hosts Jennifer Saracino and Sama Alshaibi speak with curator Rujeko Hockley of the Whitney Museum of American Art to find out more about what happens inside of art museums. They delve into Rujeko's journey of becoming a curator, working with contemporary artists, and co-curating the 2019 Whitney Biennial and earlier projects at the Brooklyn Museum. In this episode, we learn why art museums are as much about the future as they are about the past, what relationship and responsibility curators have to communities reflected within the exhibitions that they shape, and how controversy can lead to personal and professional growth.
Welcome to Race Remix, the final episode of Season 2. I'm your host, Sama Alshaibi.
And I'm your co-host, Jennifer Saracino.
And today we are joined in the studio at University of Arizona with Rujeko Hockley.
She is currently the Arnold Associate Curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We know you're a New Yorker, but you didn't grow up there. So tell us, where did you spend your formative years?
I spent my formative years in many places. I was born in Zimbabwe. My mother is from Zimbabwe and my father is English, and we moved to the United States together when I was 2 years old to Washington, D.C. for my mom to go to graduate school. And we lived there for several years before my mom started working for the United Nations. She had been in a graduate program in international relations, so she got a job. And she worked for the UN, and her first post was to Somalia in 1989. And so we moved to Somalia. The political situation there subsequently deteriorated. We had to leave. I spent a year in Houston. So I grew up in a lot of different places. I went to, I think, like 11 different schools between preschool and 12th grade. But New York was the place that I essentially decided I was going to be from, and have made that true in my adult life.
That's amazing. What a migration story.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, people think about that because of the United Nations, but it's really a lot of different factors, from school, war, a lot of scenarios.
And like a kind of very kind of standard first generation immigrant American story. My parents, we are all naturalized citizens, and recently, not, so it is interesting to think of it that way, because culturally I think I have identified as American through much of my life, but my parents absolutely do not identify as American. They are kind of, I would say, hybrid people of the world at this point in their lives. But, the negotiation of kind of two parents from two different cultures, two different continents, two different races, two different, everything could be not more different if you put it on paper, but they make sense as people in the world. And then to be the child of those people who, of course, has my own context and my own places and spaces that I grew up in that were completely different from them.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you have an North American accent, right?
Exactly.
And so, and I think sometimes people feel like if they hear that accent, this is a very specific American story that doesn't contain all of these migrations and movements and multiple identities.
Yeah, well, I think most American stories, human stories, actually contain a huge amount of migration and a huge amount of shifting. I think that it is like human nature to move.
Does this going to give you a kind of Fisher complexity in your identity, or do you feel like how does that register?
How stressed out are you about it? I think, of course, at certain times in my life, it has, and I would not trade it, because I think it has been, I had a really incredible broad kind of traveling exposure to different places and people kind of childhood that I think at the time I'm sure I was like resentful and unappreciative. Sorry to my parents. But as an adult, I really look back on it and I'm like kind of profoundly grateful. But I also know that I would have loved to go to the same school for my whole childhood. I would have loved to live in the same house my whole childhood. I have 2 children now, and I am very clearly, they are having a very different childhood than I had.
Is that intentional?
I mean, I think it's a chicken-egg situation. It's obviously intentional, but it's also deeply subconscious. You know, sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, interesting. Like, what's happening here? And I think that it gives me kind of deep kind of affirmation and pleasure to see them be very grounded in a place, in community, and to be known by, like, their neighbors, to see their preschool teacher on the street, to see their friends who they've known since they were 2, and now they're at a different school and they're all talking together. Like, I didn't have that as a child. Like, I just didn't grow up like that. And so it gives me kind of great pleasure to see my children have it.
Phenomenal.
Or as comfortable as any, like, human can, you know.
I like the way you phrased that, you know, whether that your own upbringing sort of informs what you're passing on to your children, being intentional or subconscious. And I was curious, in a similar vein, professionally, like as a curator, because it seems on this side of the table that would be an incredible gift as a sort of steward of culture. So I'm curious how your upbringing also reflects your practice.
Well, I think one of the things, even though I moved and was at different schools and, you know, different places, I was always a dancer, and that was kind of one of the deepest through lines of, I would say, the first 20 years of my life. Like, if you'd asked me who I am and what am I about, I would have described myself as a dancer, certainly through the end of college, very, like, top-note descriptor. And so I think the kind of connection to creativity, to culture, to performance, to the very particular kinds of community that a dance studio, a dance class, a performance group that you're a part of, that type of community that I built and rebuilt kind of everywhere I went, and that also kind of felt similar because you do the same thing, you know, so you have the class follows the same protocol, like you all have a shared language and kind of lexicon, whether or not you met today or you've known each other for 15 years. So I think that really is one part of how I kind of got to be a person who was kind of professionally interested in the arts. I think I realized, probably fortunately, that I like wasn't going to be a professional dancer, and that was okay. But I really, you know, I loved being in the arts. I grew up in DC and at these in these young years, and we were an immigrant family that didn't know anybody and didn't have any money, and we went to the Smithsonian museums.
So I have to confess that I went to your 2017 show at the Brooklyn Museum. So
please confess.
I have the fangirl.
And I wish everybody went.
It was amazing, and I was a grad student at the time, so it was really inspirational. So it's really exciting to be here with you so today.
Much.
And that was actually my first time at the Brooklyn Museum. And so my question, I'm going to ask you about, so Carol Duncan wrote a book called Civilizing Rituals Inside Public Art Museums, in which she has this oft-quoted citation: to control a museum means precisely to control the representation of a community and its highest values and truths. It's also the power to define the standing of individuals within that community, what we see and do not see in art museums, and on what terms and by whose authority we do or do not see it, is closely linked to larger questions about who constitutes the community and who defines its identity. So I'm wondering about your thoughts on this quote, 25 years later. And do you find this to still be a guiding principle? Are museums evolving in your role?
Well, it's very interesting to think about 25 years ago. My entire career as a curator has been in that 25 years. I started working at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 2005. So I'm approaching my 20th anniversary, which feels insane.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very mind blown and also very moved and very proud. And I think that in that 20 years of like my kind of professional engagement with museums, I think certainly one of the biggest shifts has been the work of the Studio Museum, and the work that the Studio Museum had done for many years and continues to do has become much more the work that mainstream or primarily white institutions now do as well.
Right.
So moving from a kind of culturally specific institution that was founded kind of coming out of the civil rights movement with a very specific mandate and mission, which has kind of expanded over the years, actually, to be the broadest, I would say, definition of artists of the African diaspora, artists of African descent. And you really see a lot of that in other institutions now, which when I started at the Student Museum, it felt like a very kind of little like beautiful contained world that we all knew each other and we were like delving downtown to go to openings, but that the art world fundamentally, I think, I mean, I don't know, but it probably felt more like it had felt for 20 years prior than how it now feels 20 years later, which has been all to the good. I think when we think about community and what is a community and who constitutes a community, I think the Studio Museum is an institution that's in its founding DNA to ask that question and also to be in service of a community. And that can be African descended people, that can be artists, that can be staff. I think that can be the folks on the street in Harlem. I think there's a really particular way that that's answered there. Other institutions, like the Whitney, where I work now, don't have as kind of focused a mandate just by virtue of, a Museum of American Art. Like that is a huge and broad mission, which can encompass anything because America is an incredibly kind of wide-ranging, filled with communities of every nature, of all kinds of interests, of all kinds of ethnicities, backgrounds, histories. And so I think the opening of that aperture to include more and more and more of those stories is what I have seen in the last 20 years. That in museums, art museums, I'll say, I only have ever worked at art museums, are just opening that lens to include more of what is real, which is to say the people who walk the streets of the cities and towns, college campuses that these institutions are situated in.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree because it's interesting. When I saw your show, I was doing this curatorial leadership institute, grad student, and when we went to the Studio Museum also, and so just how those institutions were framed. We also went to the Whitney, so Whitney, Brooklyn Museum, Studio, and I agree. Even in 2025, it does feel like there are certain values that are sort of being more, I hope, openly embraced across institutions that are not just specific to certain institutions, but which I think brings us to another interesting moment. Thinking about going to those spaces in 2017 and now being in 2025 and the moment that we're sort of entering into now, with the current administration, I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on where we might be going and how museums will sort of deal with supporting our communities?
Yeah, I think I often feel very lucky about the time that my career has kind of straddled, because when I started in 2005, as I said, the world of people that cared about Black artists felt very small, which didn't mean it wasn't like super vibrant, super full, super energetic, super fun. Like so many of my relationships, my friendships, my deep people that I love deeply in my life today, 20 years later, came from that time in my life. So very fruitful. And so I think one of the things that it afforded of being part of an art world within an art world, if you will, many art worlds within art worlds always, was that we were taught and told that this is all cyclical. I have very strong memories and have had subsequent conversations over the years with Lowry Stokes Sims, iconic, legendary curator, Black woman, only Black curator at the Met for 25 years. So it's her 25 years, she was kind of alone. And she brought amazing work into that collection. Beverly Buchanan's work is in the Metropolitan Museum's collection because of Lowry, and there are many, many other artists like that. And so I think the way that I'm thinking about this moment is that we basically had this 20-year really, really, really good ride, But the people that we came up, whose shoulders I feel like I have been very lucky to stand on, they were interested in the same things before. Right. They were doing that work before. whether or not it was kind of culturally validated, whether there was interest coming from the press, whether there was even interest coming, frankly, from their own peers in their own institutions, whether they were kind of swimming upstream all the time, they still continued to do that because of the kind of imperative of serving their communities. And so I acknowledge that we are also in this is a very different kind of moment, and the extremity of it is not, I don't want to like flatten to say it's all the same, but I also really, the only thing that I can really do is believe that this is cyclical and that we move through these cycles. And and people who were generally my age and my generation in the art world had this 20-year run where we were like really supported and really, we were validated. We have been validated. We have been able to do shows like the one that you saw at the Brooklyn Museum. We have been able to do all sorts of shows with all sorts of artists and speak quite freely about why that work is important. And we may be entering a time where it doesn't look the same as that, and we navigate differently, but at its core, the foundational belief that there's a multiplicity of stories and that art is one of the best ways we have to connect to our humanity across divide. That is like a core belief for me, and I just think that that is true. So I will keep knowing that that's true.
Thank you. I think being at a state public institution too, that's very comforting to hear. So thank you.
I think what you said is just fascinating, and I'm really happy to hear that. I heard a podcast with you and Ruha Benjamin, and oh my God, she's such an inspiration. And that conversation between the both of you, I mean, so important. I think what you're saying right now, right?
I was like, keep it together, be cool.
Yeah. And so I think what she was talking about, that kind of, the necessity of doing this. I mean, not to flatten the difficulties and the problems that we're having right now, but that we do this work anyway. And I find my inspiration from, I'm older than you, right? So from a history and a current practice of people who may not have all of the access points that, perhaps the Black community of artists have had, and they're still struggling, right, to get their work out. But they did the work anyway, right? Whether there's funding or not, whether there's spaces the A+ places that want to host it or not, that work is being made. And it's radical, incredible work that sometimes actually pushes creativity and thought and the way we move forward because of it.
I think about when I was working on We Wanted Revolution, the show that you saw at the Brooklyn Museum. We had all these amazing experiences, myself and Catherine Morris, my co-curator, where we would get to do these visits like with iconic, just like legendary artists. And we met with Betty Saar, in her amazing house in the hills in Laurel Canyon. She's lived there, decades, 60 years, her studio, her children, her family, just the most incredible place ever. And so that was incredible. But one of the things that really stood out, and this was repeated across many of the artists in that show who were predominantly Black women in their, I would say 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, Betty she just had books and books, like ledgers of her sales going back to like the 50s and 60s, truly her entire career. And just to see just the quantity, but also the commitment to her own archive, that is actually what was so profound and has made such an impact on me over the years, is because, as you were saying, exactly, whether or not there's critical attention, opportunities to show the work, artists are making. Artists, that is what it is to be an artist. You have the drive and you cannot do anything else, and you are doing it alone or with an audience of one, with an audience of 20,000. You're doing it. And I think that commitment to oneself actually was so powerful and moving in the context of thinking about especially Black women who had kind of come up in the 1970s and 80s, kind of between Black power and kind of second wave feminism, and really committed to their politics, but also to themselves, and then knowing that their politics and themselves were one and the same, that those were not things to be broken apart, but just that these records, I was just I'm going to cry. You kept all this stuff, there are people who just had boxes and boxes of their own their own artwork, their own correspondence, their like flyers, like their own ephemera. Like it was just so profoundly moving to just be understanding that they had been waiting, and not waiting like, oh, woe is me, I'm just going to sit on my thumbs and do nothing, but just like, I know people are going to come. Like, I know this is important. I believe in what I'm doing enough to know that I should keep this stuff. I always think about that when I'm feeling kind of like low.
Like, that's a good segue to tell us how you came to be a curator.
That was,
And what is a curator? And what do you think a curator?
Yeah.
I think we say this very easily. And it means a lot of things to a lot of different people.
It means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, which I say often. There's many, many ways to be a curator, and I have chosen to be like an institutional curator, a person who works within institutions. Partially because that's just like how my life unfolded, and partially, because I believe in institutions and I like to have a job. But I came to be a curator, I think, because, I was a dancer. I wasn't going to be a professional dancer. I went to Columbia as an undergrad, and Columbia has the core curriculum, so everyone takes the same classes. All the undergrads take like a series of classes in the humanities, essentially. One of them is art humanities. And I had never taken an art history class. I did not know what art history is. Like, I'd never thought about it. Didn't know it was a thing that existed. And that class was very profound for me because I think it was a way I realized, okay, I really love history. I really love culture. I really love art and art making, and I understand what it means to make art, to be a producer of something creative that you put out into the world for other people to like pick apart. And I also was taking kind of classes in African American studies, in kind of world history. I had a class with a professor who in art history at Barnard she taught basically a 19th century American art history class that was a social history class. And so she talked about westward expansion. She talked about Manifest Destiny in relation to like the Hudson River School painters in New York, and she talked about emancipation, and she talked about the Civil War, and she talked about race in relation to the kind of production of a visual culture of America. And I was like, oh my God, you can talk about this stuff with art? My mind is blown. And so I think that was a really important moment for me because it allowed me to see that there could be a place for someone like me who I didn't have to like bifurcate these interests, that it was a whole field of study and a whole world of people who were like, yeah, naturally, we talk about those things together. So then when I graduated, I did not know what to do with my life. I knew that I was excited by working with artists. I knew that I was excited to work with artists and work with people who had a kind of race-based lens and kind of thought about the world in that way, and equity and justice. And I needed a job. I am a curator because I got a job when I was 21 years old at the Student Museum and learned what a curator was at that job.
What a great place to start, though.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Incredible. And also, I think, so when I think about what it means to be a curator and what it has kind of meant to me, a lot of it does come from that kind of the school of the Student Museum, the school of Thelma Golden. Like she has many acolytes out in the world, and we all have there's a shared ethos. And I think it's really about, for me, it's really about being in service to artists, kind of first and foremost, to being the intermediary between the artist and the institution and really like holding that space. So I do think of it like as an intermediary position, also as a very right brain, left brain combo, which is good for me. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of kind of creative thinking in collaboration about art and about making and ideas and concepts, but there's also a lot of like logistical thinking. There's like a lot of spreadsheets, and there's a lot of tracking and planning and correspondence and like all that stuff that like I like both of those things. I don't like email. Let me just say that to everyone who's waiting for an email from me. I am sorry. I do not like email. No one does. It's a terrible invention. But just that it is a job that brings together those kind of two different kind of sides of the brain. But also it's the way that we build for the future. And so I think one of the reasons that I really love working at museums is because they have these deep histories, and what we do the acquisitions we make, the exhibitions we plan, the artists we work with, people in the future will look at that, you know, and I don't even mean like the broader world, but I mean like the me of 50 years from now will be like, oh, what's this interesting acquisition that came into the Whitney Museum in 2025? Mm-hmm. And like, what is that? Are we representing our moment through our acquisitions in a way that posterity in the future will be able to look back at the collection and kind of glean something about our time? It's really interesting and it's really important. You know, it does tell a story about individual people's subjective desires and decisions, but also if you see them in totality, maybe it actually says something bigger.
Mm-hmm. It also says something about the now too, right? Because when someone enters the canon, it definitely brings a kind of, I mean, we know they're legitimate, right? Obviously. As the curator, you might know that. As people who are lovers of art and culture and consume that, you're going to know that. But I feared sometimes that the legitimacy of artists, especially artists of color, artists that may come from underrepresented communities, it's not until they enter that canon, right? They get collected by the major museum. It's like overnight, suddenly they became important, but they were important. Their work was important. And I think that's the question I'm really, and I think many people in our audience would be really curious about who do follow the arts and are submerged, is this role of the curator, because sometimes we project this idea that they're a gatekeeper or that they're the enforcer of some agenda that's, you know, but not their own, that may be coming from financial needs or some long-standing tradition. But I actually know, just having done a teeny bit of curation, that it's very complicated to work with artists. I know, I'm an artist. We're kind of a pain. And it's difficult. And I find, like, when you have a curator that understands you and is committed to you, it's like almost like a gift, because there's so much possibility, but also because they can make that incredibly rich and important argument about the need and necessity of putting those artists into the canon, because that's not just shifting those artists' life, which you're talking about. It's so important, but it shifts the whole ground for everybody that comes after them, and how society thinks about those issues that artist talks about. Suddenly, those issues become legitimate.
Important. Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, yes, all of that. And I think that also all the other things you said are also true. I mean, sometimes curators are gatekeepers. And I'm not talking about other people. I'm talking about myself. I think that, like, living in the reality and the truth of what it means, like, it is a funnel. It gets narrower as it gets to the bottom or the top, you know. But I think that the idea of, like, there are many, many different variables at play always in acquisitions, in the ways in which artists enter a collection, in the ways in which particular works are the ones that are picked. And I think that there's a lot of intentionality and a lot of forethought and a lot of planning and effort that goes into those things. And they're also, like everything in life, is a lot of luck and happenstance and opportunity arising, meeting interest in that moment, you know? And so I think, and a lot of that you cannot plan, you know? And so, yeah, I do see and take that very seriously, that, like, these are bigger decisions that have bigger ramifications, but it's also, you can't, like, live, or I cannot live my day-to-day life, like, always thinking about every single thing like that.
It's a lot of weight on you.
It's a lot of weight.
It's a lot of weight on you to think about that every day with every decision.
Well, it's a lot of weight, but it's also just, like, not accurate to, like, how your work and your day and your job actually, like, unfold. Like, we're just, like, making a lot of micro decisions all the time, and, like, trying to keep on top of everything and trying to, like, keep all the balls in the air. And, oh, did I write back that? Oh, shit, somebody asked me about this. I forgot. Like, so all of that is happening at the same time as you're, like, having a loftier conversation or thought, you know.
Right, and curators also they're humans. They get excited about artists. They have passions. They meet somebody. They have a great conversation. Things get interesting to see. Sometimes, like, I've seen this a million times. It doesn't mean that's not a legitimate, but it's a human process as well.
Yeah, it's a very human process. Because not that, I mean, some museums are very big, but most museums are not. And most museums, people are doing a lot of work, like the work of 3 people or something, you know, and it's,
What strikes me about how you're talking about your curatorial practice is how much of it is interpersonal. It's so much about your daily interactions with people. And I was really struck by what you were saying about how you see yourself as an intermediary with artists, between artists and community. And I have to say is that comes across like in the way that you talk about artists. So I think you're really doing that. Like I feel like you're sort of the way that you talk about how you curate, I feel very much like you're an intermediary. And so it reminds me of the controversy that arose at the Whitney Biennial in 2019. That was the year when protests erupted over board Vice Chair Warren Kanders, whose company manufactured tear gas used at the U.S. border and in conflicts abroad. Artists, activists, and staff called for his resignation, and several artists even pulled their work from the show. And of course, those protests eventually led to Warren Kanders stepping down from the Whitney's board later that year. You were co-curator of that biennial, and you signed an open letter from staff and curatorial fellows calling for action, while your co-curator, Jane Panetta, did not. I'm wondering if you would share what that was like from your perspective and how you navigated those dynamics while also stewarding the exhibition and the artists involved.
I think that, was and is one of the most challenging things that I've experienced in my career and actually in my life, just like period. I think one of the things that I learned very deeply is that what I as an individual do has broader ramifications. And so you mentioned the letter. Jane Panetta, one of the deepest gifts of the biennial to me is Jane Panetta, period. She is my dear friend, my co-curator, the person I text when I'm like, what should I do? Right. When she now works at the Metropolitan Museum, when she left the Whitney, people made pins that said WWJD. What would Jane do? So that just tells you what a special, beloved person she is. And I think that I actually don't have a lot of regrets about that experience, but the one regret that I do have that I will say is that I did not speak to Jane about the letter before I signed the letter. And that was a very, very important learning experience for me about communication, about how we treat our beloveds, because the position it put her in, which I never even thought about, because I was responding from a purely like, this is the right thing to do. This is what I believe. And I don't think I would do that. I wouldn't change. That's how I felt. And that's how I felt. That's how I feel. But I would change that. I would say, hey, can we talk about this? Because we actually are a united front, whether we want to be or not. We're doing this project together. And so what I do impacts you and what you do impacts me. And that is something that I really wish, if I could do anything differently, it would have been to have a conversation with her. Just like, what are we doing? Do we want to do the same thing? Yeah. Do we not want to do the same thing? What should we do? And just that we would make a decision together. And because Jane is like a very evolved, like deeply incredible person, we did have that conversation after the fact. And I was like, oh my God, like, you're so right. What was I thinking? Thank you so much for teaching me so much. But I think the overall experience, I'm very proud of that show. I think Jane and I made a show that was the show that we wanted to make, that we were really driven by artists and by the artists that we were excited by. I think in the time there was a lot of press around like the metrics and like this percentage of women and this percentage of artists of color and this percentage of age. And I think we really made the show we wanted to make. And because of who we are and because of our interests and because of our kind of history as curators and as art professionals, the show that we made was a show that was majority women. It was a show that was majority artists of color. It was a show that had a really broad range of age and career level, because those are the things that we were interested in. That is like all the shows we had both done individually prior to ever being asked to do the biennial. Like, no one should be surprised that that's the biennial that we did. So that, I think we were very proud of the show. It was like one of the hardest things that I've ever done, truly. Like, curating a biennial is not for the weary. It is very exhausting, and it's very tiring, and it's very just draining, but also extremely uplifting and exciting and fun and like exhilarating and all of that stuff too. when I think about what happened, yeah, it was very painful. Like, it was really a painful experience because I think this question of being an intermediary was really at the heart of it, where it was like, how do we serve the artists who we invited? You know, we asked them to come and be a part of this community. And now they're finding out all the stuff that they don't like. And we didn't do it, but we are also accountable and responsible and representatives of that institution. Because at the same time, like, the way that the museum works is through the board. Like, so we had to also be very mindful and, like, real about, like, boards fund museums. Boards are the bosses of the directors of museums. And we cannot ignore that reality. It's not responsible. And it's also we're not being good stewards of our artists if we act like that's not true. Frankly.
I think it was difficult for the artists, too, because some artists wanted their work.
Yeah.
I'm an Arab artist, a Middle Eastern Arab American artist, and so we have this problem a lot, right? And these issues about, are we boycotting ourselves at some point because we're not getting our voices out? There's always a problem.
Well,
and there's always...
you know, people are so proud to be in a show like the Biennial, and I think it was really hard. And, you know, I will say that a lot of our artists were like, are you and Jane okay? Because, like, I was like, you don't need to, like, yeah, we're good. We are all going to be friends. Like, we're all in community. We all respect and love each other. You're not letting us down if you do X.
Right.
You know, we're not going to be mad at you.
So what's the question? Did you think about that question now? Because I think that was a time of a lot of museums and institutions having to take stock about who was in their collections, where funding was coming from, what they were showing. It was like, you know, extraordinary time for the United States with the, you know, and a lot of radical imagining from artists for the first time that they had some more agency and a platform, perhaps, and they could push institutions that they could maybe not have done and set, you know, with solidarity. But the truth is, we all don't fall in the same place, and ideas and how we handle it. These discussions get more and more difficult as you spread out. So thinking about where we are now, sort of circling back to how we started earlier, is this idea about solidarity. I mean, as artists and curators, as cultural workers, are we asking too much of each other to demand that we stand together against what the sort of tyrannical forces or the problems that we're facing? I mean, are we facing an existential crisis in the arts? No, I don't have to answer that last question. But I mean, is it important? Are we letting each other down? Are we taking out our disappointments out on each other rather than focusing where we need to focus art?
I think that we do ourselves a disservice by thinking that we all should think the same thing. And that we really, like, hamper our own efforts by thinking that there's only one way to advance the larger causes that we believe in. And I think there are larger causes that we, if only up to the idea that art has value in the world, that it, like, moves things, that it does something. And that doing might be a personal one-to-one interaction of an individual seeing an artwork and having a kind of profound kind of revelation of their own, in their own psyche. And it might be a board member of an institution stepping down from that position due to the pressure that was exerted by artists. To me, those aren't the same thing, but they are both proof that art does things, that art moves things, that art makes things happen, and that art has deep, deep power. And so I don't believe, like, when I think about solidarity, I think more about, like, the solidarity that I'm interested in is that, like, we are committed to treating one another with respect, and that we are committed to making an attempt to understand the position of another human being. And there are things that are beyond understanding, but that doesn't change that is, like, an ethical and moral imperative for me, who I am as a person. So, and I think this moment that we're in right now actually is calling us to do more of that. So, like, I don't like it, I don't understand it, but to just, like, dismiss it is obviously not going to work. You know, and so what else can we do besides just say, like, well, those people are terrible and they hate everybody and they're going to like ruin everything. That might be true, but just coming to that conclusion and then like ending the sentence there, and what? Then what? You know, it doesn't like do anything. And so I think curiosity is really important. And I think curiosity about other people's motivations, about what is driving people's behavior. There are things that are beyond the pale. Like, I'm like, I am not curious about some things, about some people's ideologies and beliefs, if they have created real harm and real danger in the world to individuals. But I think as an ideal and as like something to just really challenge ourselves, we have to be curious. Like, we have to remain curious about other people's experiences. And we deserve to receive that curiosity as well, you know? But just because somebody else is like, I think I often think about the way that I like talk to my children about how to navigate conflict or like what to do and if they have questions or this person said this. And it's like, just because somebody says something mean to you or somebody is like shitty to you, you can defend yourself, but you don't have to be shitty back to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you are not shitty back to them, that is not because of any great concern for their well-being necessarily. It's because it is what allows you to move through your life, through your day, whole.
You know, if we don't actually share that kind of empathetic space with everybody, I mean, we're a university, and so having difficult, complicated conversations from people who come from all over is really important. And I think institutions, museums, and art, it's really important that happens there too. Art is not for any particular one kind of people.
So who's been your greatest inspiration? What exhibition are you most proud of?
I'm like continually inspired by artists because of their just deep doggedness and just commitment to their own, to like the power of what they have that no one else has. And then let's see, favorite shows. I mean, We Wanted a Revolution is my like very, very, very special baby that really, it's like one of the things that I'm most proud of in my life, in my career. It just was very important to me personally in terms of like my growth as a curator, but also my growth as a person, my growth as like a Black woman, kind of feeling like I was stepping into a certain kind of, not even like a professional adulthood, but just like a knowing of myself and like trusting of myself and a trusting that like the things that I thought were important and that should be in the world would be received by people that way, that the world wanted those things too, and really just like standing in that belief. And the biennial, I am very, very proud of the biennial. And it was, as I said already, like a real roller coaster. But it was also like so amazing. Like it was so amazing to work on. Yeah, and then let me think. I really love kind of thematic group shows. And so I think that is like definitely one of the like School of Thelma Golden highest order achievement as a curator is a thematic group show. And so that is something that I think we all kind of who kind of came through the Student Museum, have come through the Student Museum, share that feeling. So, I did a show at the Whitney a couple of years ago, a collection show called Inheritance. But that was a show that kind of came out of my own kind of self and my own life and like the pandemic and becoming a parent and just kind of being in this generational moment between having young children and having aging parents and just really I don't think it's actually just having children. I think it's like you getting to a certain age yourself where you start to like look back and you also are looking forward and you're starting to even look like the back, like how did my parents how did they end up being the people that they are? And like, so I was having like all of these thoughts as I became a parent of a second child. And it's a show that really came out of that. And it was really powerful and really meaningful to me to be able to make something that really came out of my own experience. And like, this is one of, the tenets of like Black feminism and that We Wanted a Revolution was really built around was like our greatest power is in speaking from our own experience, like the I position, not in a selfish or ego driven way, but in a like, what I have to say is important and who I am is unique. And like my subjectivity is as important as anybody else's, not to be put on a pedestal, but here I am, just like anybody else.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect segue when you commented about looking back and looking forward. And for our students, being at this university, I'm wondering, do you have any advice for emerging artists as they begin to work with curators and or emerging curators as they begin to work with artists?
Well, everybody is just a person. So, be nice, be kind, assume best intentions. And I think for artists and curators, I would say, it is really important to see artwork in person. It's really important to yes, there's an entire social aspect of being an artist, of being a curator, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, but that often has been part of it. And I think what that does is it builds community and it builds generational community. And so I think when I think about emerging artists, when I think about emerging curators, I think it's really important to have a cohort. And so part of going to the things and going to the openings and going to the talks is about building that cohort in as much as it's about did you go to that party? Did I get invited? Did you get invited? Whatever. It's the art world. We are shallow. So that's also part of it. But so I would say see art in person, go to things, be out there, build your community. Because it continues, as I said, many of my professional colleagues who are also my friends are people that I've known for 15 to 20 years who we kind of were like little art babies together. And that's true of artists too. So curators and artists, people who have gone on to do all vast array of types of jobs in and out of the art world. So not everybody stays in the same path, which is obviously fine, but we are still part of a cohort. So yeah, that is what I would say about that. And then I would also just say for curators, I think it is important to think of yourself in service. I think the way in which the idea of being a curator, the job, has gotten a lot sexier. It's got everyone's a curator. Maybe that moment is over. But there was that moment where everything was curated. Everyone was a curator. Everybody is, and it has a historical grounding as a profession, and it has, I think at its best, it is about being in service to artists or to objects. So this idea of being in service, I think, is very important. Yeah. And sometimes gets a little lost in the glitzy, glitzy, glam, glam.
I have one practical question, just because sometimes I get this a lot from my students, and someone that lives in Arizona, I don't know how to answer this because I never took this road. I never went to New York City. I mean, obviously I go to New York City all the time as an artist, but I never moved there. I never felt this big need. I went to art school in Chicago, and then I became a mom kind of young in my 20s, and then went to grad school and started teaching in Arizona and been planted here for 20 years. But I get this question a lot. Do we need to move to New York to make it as a curator, as an artist? Do you feel like there's value in taking a few years to really get in that thing and get in there and try it and risk it?
I think that there is value in trying something and getting into something and risking something, and it does not have to be New York. I think New York is a wildly expensive, extremely inhospitable to humans, especially humans who are I'm just doing this for the love and I'm not making any money, and it's more and more inhospitable to that. And so again, I was able to forge a career in the arts in New York because I was able to live with my parents, and that is 100% true. So I don't think it is, I don't think it's responsible to tell people that they need to do that if they don't have some sort of very regionally specific safety net. Because it just doesn't, the math doesn't math. It doesn't make sense. So I guess it's just my bigger answer is we are so hyper-professionalized that people can't even enjoy things that they just just because they like them. It always has to be going towards something. You can't just read a book because you like to read books. It has to be contributing towards this. You can't. And I think that I see that a lot in younger folks, my curatorial assistants that I worked with at the Whitney, just friends and peers that are just a little bit younger than me. I mean, I understand there's so many reasons economically and the kind of era of capitalism that we're living in, and the kind of pressure of social media and what that has done.
It's a big one.
It's a huge one.
It's the idea of professionalization and the how-to and get the career and no real lived experience, and then just just being a little messy and figuring it out and failing a few times and whatever. I mean, I don't like that word failing. It's just
or failing.
Yeah.
Like, my 6-year-old daughter came home the other day and told me that, like, she's like, Mommy, did you know that when you make a mistake, your brain grows? And I was like, what are they teaching you? Like, I need to go back to school. I need to be in kindergarten in 2025.
That's the story right here. You got to go. No,
I need to be in kindergarten in 2025 because, like, that was so profound to me.
Yeah.
Like, did you know when you make mistakes, your brain grows? And so, yeah, it is okay to fail. Like it is okay to fail, and it is okay to, like, do things just for the fun of it. So I think that the answer I would say is, like, no, you don't need to move to New York, but you do need to, like, put yourself out there. And you probably need to put yourself out there, like, in person. Even if what you're really interested in is, like, digital art. You still, you know, even if what you're interested in exists on, like, a networked platform, you still need to put yourself out there physically, probably. And you don't need to go all the way to New York to, like, do that, frankly. And you could go all the way to New York and still not do that. And that's just a very expensive experience.
Amazing. Well, Rujeko, this has been an incredible conversation. I think we could just sit with you for hours and learn so much.
Thank you.
To share this room with you.
It's so fun. I love it.
Come back anytime.
Yes.
The saguaros and the purple mountains are waiting
so
for you.
Pretty.
It's not New York City. We don't have any of those tall buildings, but we have tall saguaros.
Very tall. I noticed that. They're extremely tall.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you for joining Race Remix today. This episode is made possible through the generous donations of our sponsors and the efforts of our team of students, staff, faculty, and community partners. If you enjoyed this conversation, listen to more episodes at raceremix.arts.arizona.edu.